Lila Anderson grew up surrounded by the wilderness. Her father, Dr. Ethan Anderson, was a renowned wildlife conservationist who spent his life studying and protecting big cats, particularly tigers. Their home was not a traditional one, it was a research sanctuary on the edge of a sprawling jungle, where orphaned or injured animals were given a second chance at life. Among the many animals that passed through the sanctuary, one stood out: Raya, a Bengal tiger cub. Lila was just 10 years old when her father brought Raya home. The tiny cub had lost her mother to poachers and was found alone in the jungle, weak and frightened. From the moment their eyes met, a bond formed between Lila and Raya. Lila spent her days feeding the cub, playing with her, and even sleeping beside her in a cozy corner of the sanctuary. Raya wasn't just an animal to her, she was family. As Raya grew, so did her wild instincts. By the time she was 2 years old, it became clear that she was no longer suited for life in the sanctuary. Dr. Anderson decided it was time to return Raya to the wild, a heart-wrenching decision for Lila. On the day of Raya's release, Lila hugged the tiger tightly, whispering, "I'll never forget you." Raya let out a soft growl, almost as if she understood, before disappearing into the jungle. Years passed, and Lila often thought of Raya. She had grown into a confident young woman, following in her father's footsteps as a wildlife biologist. One day, Dr. Anderson announced that he wanted to revisit the jungle where they had released Raya years ago. Lila, eager to reconnect with the wild animals she loved, insisted on joining him. Everyone warned her, "Raya is a wild tiger now. She won't remember you, and it's too dangerous." But Lila's heart told her otherwise. Against all odds, she believed the bond they once shared might still exist. What followed was a journey into the depths of the jungle, an encounter with the unknown, and a moment that would leave everyone speechless. Lila's heart raced as the boat pushed through the dense waterways of the jungle. The trip was more than just a research expedition, it was a reunion she had dreamed of for years. Beside her, Dr. Anderson reviewed notes and maps, speaking with the local guides about the changes in the tiger population since Raya's release. Lila's mind, however, was far from the technical details. She was consumed by memories of Raya as a cub, her playful growls, the way she nuzzled into Lila's arms, and the trust they had built. The guides, experienced trackers with decades of knowledge, had been briefed about Raya. "She's been spotted in this territory over the years," one of them said, pointing to an area on the map. "But you should know, wild tigers are unpredictable. If we do find her, we must keep our distance." Lila nodded, but the warning only deepened her determination. She couldn't explain it, but she felt that Raya would remember her. "I know it's risky," she admitted to her father during a quiet moment on the boat, "but I need to try." Raya was family. Dr. Anderson placed a hand on her shoulder. "Lila, I understand how you feel. But remember, tigers are solitary by nature. She's built a life here, one that doesn't include us anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by the sight of claw marks on a nearby tree, deep grooves that indicated a dominant female tiger's presence. The guides confirmed it could be Raya's territory. The group anchored the boat and prepared to trek through the dense jungle on foot. As they walked, the cacophony of the jungle surrounded them, birds calling, leaves rustling, and distant roars echoing through the trees. Lila felt both exhilarated and anxious. Every sound made her wonder if Raya was nearby. Hours passed with no sign of the tiger. The group paused near a small clearing to rest. Dr. Anderson used the time to explain to Lila how tigers mark their territory and how to interpret the signs of their presence. He gestured to clawed trees, paw prints in the dirt, and the faint musky scent of a tiger nearby. Just as they were preparing to move again, one of the guides raised his hand, signaling for silence. Everyone froze. The air grew still, and the only sound was the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. Then, from the shadows, a low growl reverberated through the clearing. The growl grew louder, and the group instinctively backed away. Lila's heart pounded. She could feel the tension in the air as the tiger stepped into the clearing. Her coat was a radiant orange, striped with deep black, and her eyes gleamed with the wild intelligence of a predator. "Raya," Lila whispered, unable to contain herself. The tiger's ears perked at the sound of her voice. For a moment, the massive cat stood still, her gaze fixed on Lila. The guides whispered warnings to stay back, but Lila took a cautious step forward. Her father grabbed her arm. "Lila, don't." "She knows me, Dad," Lila said, her voice trembling. She slowly knelt to make herself seem less threatening. "Raya, it's me." The tiger tilted her head, her expression almost curious. Then, to everyone's astonishment, she took a step closer. The guides gripped their tranquilizer guns tightly, ready to intervene, but Dr. Anderson signaled for them to hold off. This was Lila's moment. Raya let out a soft rumble, not the threatening growl of a predator, but a sound that Lila recognized. It was the same rumble Raya had made as a cub when she was happy. Tears welled up in Lila's eyes as the tiger moved closer, sniffing the air around her. "I told you she'd remember," Lila said, her voice breaking with emotion. Raya lowered her massive head, and for a brief moment, their foreheads touched. It was a gesture so gentle and so familiar that Lila's heart swelled with joy. The years melted away, and it was as if they were back in the sanctuary, just a girl and her tiger. The moment was short-lived. A sudden rustling in the bushes startled Raya, and she stepped back, her wild instincts taking over. Lila understood. This was Raya's world now, and she was only a visitor. As the tiger disappeared into the jungle, Lila felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. She had found Raya, and their bond was still there, but the encounter reminded her that Raya was no longer the cub she had raised. She was a queen of the jungle now, thriving in her natural habitat. Dr. Anderson placed a comforting arm around his daughter. "You got your answer, Lila." "She didn't forget." "She didn't," Lila said, smiling through her tears. "And that's all I needed to know." The group made their way back to the boat, the jungle now alive with the echoes of their incredible encounter. For Lila, the journey had been worth every risk. Raya was more than just a memory. She was a part of her, and always would be. The boat ride back to the base camp was quiet, the hum of the engine blending with the jungle's symphony. Lila leaned against the railing, her thoughts drifting back to her encounter with Raya. She replayed the moment over and over, the soft rumble, the touch of their foreheads, and the undeniable connection that remained after all those years. Dr. Anderson, sitting nearby, broke the silence. "Lila, that was extraordinary. Most wild animals wouldn't have reacted that way, even if they did recognize someone from their past." "It felt like she still trusted me," Lila said, her voice filled with wonder. "But I could also see the wildness in her eyes. She's changed." "That's the point," her father said. "Raya is where she's meant to be. You gave her that chance." The guides, meanwhile, were more subdued. Though they had witnessed a rare moment of connection between human and animal, they were also acutely aware of the risks. One guide, a seasoned tracker named Mateo, approached Dr. Anderson. "We should tread carefully, sir. Raya may have shown trust today, but she's still a wild tiger." "We mustn't forget that." Dr. Anderson nodded. "Agreed. Well, stick to the plan, observe from a distance and avoid unnecessary risks." Back at the base camp, the group gathered around a map to plan their next steps. Mateo pointed to an area further upriver where Raya's movements had been tracked recently. "She might have cubs," he said, his tone cautious. "It's not uncommon for a tigress her age. If that's the case, we need to be even more careful." The possibility of Raya having cubs reignited Lila's curiosity. "Cubs? That would be amazing. It means she's not just surviving, she's thriving." "Yes," Mateo replied, "but a mother tiger is fiercely protective. If we get too close, she won't hesitate to defend them." Despite the warning, Lila's excitement grew. The idea of Raya starting a family of her own was heartwarming. It was proof that their efforts to rehabilitate and release her had succeeded. The next morning, the team prepared for another journey into the jungle. This time, they would head deeper into Raya's territory. As they loaded the boat, Mateo handed Lila a pair of binoculars. You'll need these. If we're lucky, we might catch a glimpse of her from a safe distance. The boat ride was longer this time, the river winding through dense jungle canopies that seemed to close in around them. The air was thick with humidity, and the calls of exotic birds echoed through the trees. Lila scanned the shoreline with her binoculars, her heart racing with anticipation. Suddenly, the boat slowed. Mateo raised a hand, signaling for silence. "Tracks," he whispered, pointing to the muddy bank. The team disembarked carefully, following the fresh paw prints that led into the jungle. As they trekked through the dense foliage, the signs became more evident: clawed trees, broken branches, and the faint smell of a tiger's musk. The guides moved with precision, their eyes scanning every shadow. Lila stayed close to her father, her excitement tempered by the weight of the moment. Then, they heard it, a soft growl, distant but unmistakable. The group froze. Mateo motioned for everyone to stay low and quiet. Using his binoculars, he scanned the area ahead. A moment later, he gestured for Lila to look. Through the dense greenery, Lila saw her, Raya, lounging in the shade of a large tree. And she wasn't alone. 2 small cubs played nearby, their tiny bodies clumsily tumbling over each other as they explored their surroundings. Lila's breath caught in her throat. It was a sight she would never forget. "She has cubs," Lila whispered, her voice filled with awe. "She's a mother." Dr. Anderson smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "She's done well." The team stayed at a safe distance, watching quietly as Raya and her cubs interacted. The tigress was relaxed, her watchful eyes scanning the area but showing no immediate concern. The cubs, oblivious to the presence of humans, continued their playful antics. Lila couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. Everything they had worked for, the years of care, the difficult decision to release Raya into the wild, had led to this moment. Raya wasn't just surviving, she was thriving. As the sun began to set, the team decided it was time to head back. The jungle was no place to linger after dark. Before leaving, Lila took one last look at Raya and her cubs. She whispered a silent goodbye, knowing this would likely be her last chance to see them. On the boat ride back, the mood was reflective. The team was in awe of what they had witnessed, but they also knew the challenges Raya faced. Mateo broke the silence, his voice serious. "A tigress with cubs will attract attention, other predators, rival tigers, even poachers. We need to ensure her safety." Dr. Anderson nodded. "Well, report our findings to the sanctuary. They can increase patrols in the area." Lila stared out at the river, her thoughts racing. Seeing Raya again had been everything she hoped for, but it also came with a sense of responsibility. Raya's life in the wild was fragile, and Lila couldn't help but worry about her future. As the boat docked at the base camp, Lila turned to her father. "Do you think we'll ever see her again?" Dr. Anderson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Maybe, but even if we don't, we know she's where she belongs." Lila smiled, her heart full despite the bittersweet goodbye. Raya was more than a memory now. She was a testament to the power of trust, love, and the wild's resilience. The next morning, the team gathered early to discuss their observations. Raya's cubs had filled everyone with hope, but Mateo remained cautious. "We need to tread carefully," he reminded them. "The presence of cubs changes everything. Raya will be more protective, and we don't want to inadvertently put her or the cubs in danger." As they packed their equipment, Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The jungle, though breathtaking, held an unpredictability that made every moment feel like the calm before a storm. Still, the chance to learn more about Raya and her cubs outweighed any lingering fears. The group set off into the dense greenery, following the trail they had marked the previous day. This time, their movements were slower and more deliberate. Every rustle in the undergrowth, every distant call of a bird, heightened their senses. The jungle was alive, and they were merely visitors. As they approached the area where they had last seen Raya, Mateo held up his hand, signaling everyone to stop. He scanned the ground and pointed to a fresh set of tracks. She's been here recently, he said. And she's moving quickly. Why would she be moving so fast? Lila asked, concern creeping into her voice. Mateo frowned. It could mean she sensed a threat. The team pressed on, their pace quickening. Lila's heart raced, her mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. What if poachers had found Raya? What if a rival tiger threatened her cubs? She clenched her fists, determined to help if they found her in trouble. Suddenly, a guttural roar echoed through the trees, freezing everyone in place. It was Raya, and she sounded distressed. Mateo motioned for silence and led the group toward the sound, his movements swift but cautious. Lila followed close behind, her pulse pounding in her ears. As they drew closer, they saw Raya pacing near a cluster of bushes. Her ears were flattened, and her tail lashed furiously. The cubs were nowhere in sight. Something's wrong, Lila whispered, her voice barely audible. Mateo nodded. She's agitated. We need to figure out what's going on without alarming her further. Dr. Anderson motioned for Lila to stay back while he and Mateo moved closer. Using binoculars, they scanned the area around Raya. Then, Mateo spotted it, a large snake coiled near a hollow log where the cubs were hiding. The snake was massive, its scales glinting in the filtered sunlight. It posed a serious threat to the cubs, and Raya knew it. We have to do something, Lila said, stepping forward. Mateo shook his head. It's too dangerous. We can't intervene directly. Raya needs to handle this on her own. But what if she can't? Lila asked, her voice breaking. Dr. Anderson placed a hand on her shoulder. We have to trust her instincts, Lila. This is her world. Raya's growls grew louder, a mix of warning and challenge. The snake, sensing her presence, uncoiled slightly, its head raised in a menacing posture. The tension was palpable as predator faced predator, each sizing up the other. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, Raya lunged at the snake. The two animals collided in a blur of motion, their growls and hisses reverberating through the jungle. The team watched in stunned silence as Raya fought with a ferocity that left no doubt about her determination to protect her cubs. The battle was intense, the snake striking repeatedly while Raya used her massive paws and powerful jaws to subdue it. After what felt like an eternity, Raya delivered a final, decisive blow, pinning the snake to the ground. She let out a triumphant roar, her dominance over the intruder established. Lila exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She did it, she said, her voice filled with awe. Mateo nodded. She's a true warrior. Raya turned her attention to the hollow log, sniffing it cautiously before nudging it gently with her nose. Moments later, the cubs emerged, their tiny bodies trembling but unharmed. Raya licked each of them, her growls softening into comforting rumbles. The team watched the reunion in silence, their hearts swelling with admiration for the tigress. It was a moment of raw, untamed beauty, a mother's love and determination laid bare. As the group began to retreat, giving Raya and her cubs the space they needed, Lila couldn't help but feel a deeper connection to the tigress. She's incredible, she said softly. It's like she knows exactly what she needs to do, no matter the danger. Dr. Anderson smiled. That's the wild for you. It's brutal, but it's also beautiful. Back at the base camp, the team reflected on what they had witnessed. Mateo, usually reserved, spoke up. This changes things. Raya's territory needs to be monitored more closely. We can't let anything happen to her or the cubs. Dr. Anderson agreed. We'll report everything to the sanctuary and recommend increased patrols. Raya has proven she can handle herself, but the more we can do to protect her habitat, the better. Lila, sitting by the campfire, stared into the flames. The day's events had left her both exhilarated and humbled. Raya's strength and resilience were a testament to the wild's power and grace, but they also highlighted the fragility of her existence. I wish I could stay here forever, Lila said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Anderson chuckled. The jungle has a way of pulling you in. But remember, Our work here is to ensure it thrives, even when we're not around." Lila nodded, a sense of purpose settling over her. She had come to see Raya, but she was leaving with so much more, a renewed commitment to protecting the wild and the creatures that called it home. As the team continued to observe Raya and her cubs from a distance, Lila found herself reflecting on her childhood memories with the tigress. The bond they once shared was something she never thought she'd experience again. And yet, here she was, in the heart of the jungle, witnessing the tiger she raised thriving in the wild. That night, back at camp, Lila couldn't sleep. She sat outside her tent, gazing at the moonlight filtering through the canopy. Her thoughts were consumed by what she'd seen earlier. The memory of Raya protecting her cubs stirred something deep within her, an overwhelming mix of pride and longing. Mateo, noticing Lila's absence from the tents, joined her by the campfire. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, handing her a cup of tea. Lila shook her head. "Seeing Raya today brought back so much. I never thought I'd see her again, let alone like this. She's breathtaking." "She is," Mateo agreed. "But remember, she's not the same tiger you knew. Years in the wild changed them. She's built for survival now." Lila nodded but couldn't help wondering if Raya still remembered her. The bond they had shared wasn't just about survival, it was about trust and love. Could those emotions withstand years of separation? The next morning, the team prepared to track Raya again. Lila felt a nervous excitement bubbling inside her. She didn't know what the day would bring, but she was determined to make the most of every moment. The group retraced their steps from the previous day, carefully navigating through the dense jungle. They moved silently, their senses attuned to the sounds of the forest. It wasn't long before they spotted Raya. She was lounging under a large tree, her cubs playfully tumbling over each other nearby. "Stay back," Mateo whispered. "We don't want to spook her." But as Lila watched, her heart ached to get closer. She wanted Raya to see her, to know that she was there. Ignoring Mateo's caution, Lila stepped forward slowly, her movements deliberate and unthreatening. "Lila, stop!" Mateo hissed, but she didn't. Her focus was entirely on Raya. The tigress lifted her head, her amber eyes locking onto Lila. The tension was immediate. Raya's ears perked up, and her body stiffened. The cubs, sensing their mother's change in demeanor, froze in place. Lila stopped a safe distance away, her heart pounding in her chest. "Raya," she said softly, her voice trembling. "It's me." For a moment, it felt as if time stood still. The jungle around them seemed to fade away, leaving only Lila and Raya in their shared moment. The tigress slowly rose to her feet, her gaze never leaving Lila. The team watched in stunned silence, their breaths held as they waited to see what would happen next. Raya took a cautious step forward, her movements fluid and deliberate. Lila didn't move, her hands by her sides, showing no signs of aggression or fear. "It's okay," she whispered. "I am here." The tigress moved closer, her nose twitching as she caught Lila's scent. Something flickered in her eyes, recognition? Curiosity? Lila didn't know, but her heart swelled with hope. Finally, Raya stopped just a few feet away. She lowered her head slightly, her amber eyes searching Lila's face. Lila smiled, tears welling up in her eyes. "You remember me, don't you?" she said, her voice barely audible. The moment was interrupted by one of the cubs letting out a playful growl. Raya turned her head, her maternal instincts taking over as she checked on her young. But then, to everyone's astonishment, she returned her attention to Lila. The tigress stepped even closer, her massive form towering over the young woman. Lila slowly extended her hand, palm up, showing Raya she meant no harm. To her amazement, Raya gently nudged her hand with her nose. The touch was brief, but it was enough to bring tears streaming down Lila's face. Mateo and the rest of the team watched in awe. "This is incredible," he whispered. "I've never seen anything like it." Dr. Anderson nodded, his expression one of wonder. "It's a testament to the bond they shared." It's rare, but it's real. Raya turned away and returned to her cubs, nuzzling them gently as if to reassure them. Lila stepped back, giving the tigress the space she needed. She wiped her tears and looked at Mateo, who gave her a small nod of approval. As they made their way back to camp, Lila felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The brief interaction with Raya had been everything she hoped for and more. It was proof that the bond they shared had not been erased by time or distance. Back at camp, the team discussed what they had witnessed. "This changes everything," Dr. Anderson said. "Raya's reaction to Lila is a rare glimpse into the emotional depth of these animals. It's something we'll need to study further." Mateo agreed. "But we need to be careful. The more human interaction she has, the more we risk disrupting her natural behaviors." Lila understood their concerns, but for now, she allowed herself to bask in the joy of the day's events. Seeing Raya again and knowing she was thriving gave her a renewed sense of purpose. The euphoria from Lila's reunion with Raya was short-lived. As the team debriefed around the campfire that evening, Mateo voiced a concern that hung heavy in the air. "Lila," he began, his tone cautious but firm, "what happened today was extraordinary, but it's also risky. Raya might remember you, but she's a wild animal now. We can't predict how she'll react next time." Lila nodded, though her heart resisted the words. "I understand, Mateo. But seeing her again, it felt like she remembered me, like we still had that connection." Mateo glanced at Dr. Anderson, who added, "That connection is remarkable, Lila, but it's fragile. Wild instincts take precedence over past bonds. We need to tread carefully, for her sake as much as ours." The conversation turned to the practicalities of their research. Raya's cubs needed to adapt to the jungle's challenges, and the team couldn't risk disrupting their upbringing. Mateo emphasized the need to maintain a safe distance, observing rather than interacting. The next morning, the team set out with a renewed sense of caution. They tracked Raya's movements carefully, staying hidden behind dense foliage and using binoculars to observe her and the cubs from a distance. The tigress appeared to have resumed her usual routine, hunting for food and teaching her cubs survival skills. But as they watched, a new challenge emerged. Another tiger, larger and more aggressive, entered Raya's territory. The team watched anxiously as the intruder stalked closer to her den. "Male tigers can be territorial and dangerous to cubs," Dr. Anderson explained in a hushed voice. "This could be trouble." Raya noticed the intruder and immediately went on high alert. She growled low and deep, positioning herself between the male and her cubs. The tension was palpable as the two tigers sized each other up, their muscles coiled and ready to strike. Lila's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She wanted desperately to intervene, but she knew that stepping in would only put everyone at risk. All she could do was hope that Raya's strength and instincts would be enough to protect her cubs. The standoff lasted for what felt like an eternity. The male tiger snarled and lunged, but Raya was quick and fierce. She countered his attack with a swipe of her massive paw, sending him stumbling back. The cubs huddled together, their small bodies trembling as they watched their mother fight. Finally, after a series of brutal clashes, the male retreated, defeated. Raya stood victorious, her chest heaving as she growled one last warning. The cubs cautiously approached her, nuzzling against her legs for reassurance. Back at camp, the team reviewed the footage they had captured. "Raya's resilience is incredible," Mateo said, his admiration evident. "She's not just surviving, she's thriving." But Lila couldn't shake the fear she had felt during the confrontation. "What if that male comes back?" she asked. "Or another predator? The jungle is so dangerous, especially for the cubs." Dr. Anderson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Raya has proven she can handle herself. And she's teaching her cubs the skills they'll need to survive. That's the natural order of things." As the days passed, the team continued to observe Raya, documenting her interactions with the cubs and the challenges they faced. Lila's longing to reconnect with the tigress grew stronger, but she respected the team's decision to keep their distance. Then, One evening, a storm rolled in, drenching the jungle in heavy rain. The team sought shelter in their tents, but Lila couldn't sleep. Her thoughts were consumed by worry for Raya and the cubs. Were they safe? Had they found shelter from the storm? Unable to shake her unease, Lila grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. She felt a pull, a deep, inexplicable urge to find Raya. Ignoring the voice of reason, she followed the faint traces of the tigress trail through the rain-soaked jungle. The storm made the trek treacherous, with muddy paths and low visibility. Lila slipped and stumbled but pressed on, driven by a combination of fear and determination. Finally, she spotted a familiar silhouette in the distance. It was Raya, sheltering her cubs under the cover of a large tree. Relief flooded Lila as she watched the tigress huddle protectively around her young. She felt a surge of admiration for Raya's strength and resilience. The tigress had faced so many challenges, yet she remained steadfast in her role as a mother. But as Lila stood there, watching from the shadows, a chilling sound reached her ears, a low growl, deep and menacing. She turned slowly, her flashlight catching the gleam of eyes in the darkness. Another predator was nearby, drawn by the scent of the cubs. Lila froze, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't lead the predator to Raya and the cubs, but she also couldn't outrun it. Summoning her courage, she waved her flashlight, trying to appear larger and more threatening. "Go away!" she shouted, her voice shaking but firm. The predator, a jaguar, snarled and took a step closer. Lila's heart pounded as she braced herself for what seemed inevitable. But then, out of nowhere, Raya appeared. The tigress let out a powerful roar, her presence commanding and terrifying. The jaguar hesitated, its confidence wavering under Raya's glare. With a final snarl, it turned and slinked back into the jungle. Lila exhaled shakily, her knees nearly giving out beneath her. Raya approached her, her amber eyes locking onto Lila's. For a moment, there was a silent understanding between them, a mutual recognition of the bond they still shared. Then, with a gentle nudge of her massive head, Raya guided Lila back toward safety. The storm subsided as Lila returned to camp, escorted by Raya's protective presence. When she emerged from the jungle, soaked and trembling, Mateo and Dr. Anderson rushed to meet her. "Lila, what were you thinking?" Mateo exclaimed, his tone sharp with concern. "I couldn't sleep," Lila admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I needed to know Raya and her cubs were safe." Dr. Anderson's gaze shifted past Lila to the tigress lingering at the edge of the clearing. "You went out during the storm and encountered Raya?" he asked, incredulity mingling with curiosity. "Yes," Lila replied, her voice steadier now. "And she saved me. There was a jaguar, and she protected me." The team stared in stunned silence. Mateo shook his head, his frustration yielding to amazement. "That tiger keeps defying everything we think we know about wild animals." Raya lingered a moment longer before retreating into the jungle, her cubs following close behind. Lila watched her go, a mix of gratitude and longing swelling in her chest. "She remembered me," Lila murmured. "I am sure of it." Mateo sighed. "This bond of yours is extraordinary, Lila. But it's also dangerous, for both of you. Raya is wild now, and every interaction risks upsetting the delicate balance we're trying to observe." Lila nodded, but the look in her eyes said she wasn't ready to let go of the connection she had rekindled. Over the next few days, the team focused on their research, but an unspoken tension lingered. Mateo and Dr. Anderson were wary of further encounters with Raya, while Lila wrestled with conflicting emotions. She respected the team's scientific mission, but her heart ached for the tigress she had raised. One evening, as the team reviewed footage of Raya and her cubs, Dr. Anderson noticed something unusual. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen. "Raya keeps leading her cubs toward the river, but she doesn't cross. She's avoiding something." Mateo leaned in, his brow furrowed. "Could it be another predator?" "Possibly," Dr. Anderson replied. "Or a human presence. We need to investigate." The next morning, the team followed Raya's trail to the riverbank. There, they found signs of human activity, discarded trash, a makeshift campfire, and deep tire tracks leading into the jungle. "This isn't good," Mateo said grimly. "Poachers." Lila's heart sank. Ray is avoiding the river because she senses danger. Her instincts are protecting her cubs. Dr. Anderson nodded. "We need to report this to the local authorities and ensure the area is monitored." As they documented the evidence, Lila felt a surge of protectiveness for Raya and her family. The thought of losing them to poachers was unbearable. That night, Lila lay awake, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the image of Raya standing between her and the jaguar, her fierce loyalty as evident as it had been when she was a cub. Lila felt an overwhelming urge to repay that loyalty. The next morning, she approached Mateo and Dr. Anderson with a proposal. "We need to do more than report this. We need to find a way to protect Raya and her cubs." Mateo frowned. "Lila, we're researchers, not wildlife rangers. Our job is to observe and document." "But this isn't just about research," Lila insisted. "Raya isn't just another tiger to me. I raised her. I owe her my help." Dr. Anderson considered her words. "Lila, I understand how you feel, but stepping into this could put all of us in danger. Poachers are ruthless." Lila's determination didn't waver. "I'll take the risk. Raya would do the same for me." Despite their reservations, the team agreed to adjust their plans. They would set up additional cameras and motion sensors near the river to monitor poacher activity and share their findings with local authorities. Lila threw herself into the effort, her resolve fueled by her bond with Raya. As they worked, Lila couldn't help but reflect on the choices she had made. She had always known that releasing Raya into the wild was the right thing to do, but it hadn't been easy. Now, seeing Raya as a mother, thriving despite the challenges of the jungle, Lila felt a deep sense of pride. But pride wasn't enough to quell her fears. What if the poachers found Raya and her cubs before the authorities could intervene? The thought haunted her, driving her to push herself harder. One afternoon, as they reviewed the footage from their newly placed cameras, Lila spotted something that made her blood run cold. A group of men armed with rifles was crossing the river, heading in the direction of Raya's territory. "They're moving fast," Mateo said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to warn the authorities." Dr. Anderson grabbed the radio, relaying the coordinates to the local wildlife protection unit. But Lila couldn't sit idly by. She knew the jungle too well to believe help would arrive in time. "I am going after them," she said, her voice steady but resolute. Mateo grabbed her arm. "Lila, no. It's too dangerous." "I have to," she replied, meeting his gaze. "If we wait, it might be too late for Raya and her cubs." Lila moved quickly through the jungle, her heart pounding as she followed the trail of the poachers. She knew she was taking a huge risk, but the thought of Raya and her cubs in danger gave her the courage to press on. As she drew closer, she heard voices, gruff and impatient. She crouched low, peering through the foliage. The poachers were setting up a trap near a clearing where Raya often rested with her cubs. Lila's mind raced. She needed a plan to warn Raya without revealing herself to the poachers. Her gaze fell on a nearby tree, its branches arching over the clearing. An idea began to form. Lila climbed the tree as quietly as she could, her heart racing with each careful step. The poachers' voices were just below her, their laughter grating against her nerves. She positioned herself on a sturdy branch, high enough to remain hidden but close enough to act. Below, the poachers began spreading bait laced with traps, clearly intended for Raya and her cubs. Lila felt a surge of anger but pushed it aside. There wasn't time for hesitation. She pulled out a whistle she had brought, a relic from her childhood training sessions with Raya. The sound, she hoped, would signal danger to the tiger without alerting the poachers. Taking a deep breath, Lila blew the whistle in short bursts, mimicking the alarm calls of jungle birds. The poachers froze, their heads snapping up as they scanned the trees. One of them cursed. "What was that?" "Probably nothing," another replied, though his tone betrayed unease. Lila kept blowing the whistle, varying the pattern. She knew Raya's sharp instincts would pick up on the warning. The poachers, however, seemed to grow more agitated. "Let's hurry up and finish this," one muttered, gesturing toward the traps. In the distance, Raya was resting with her cubs. Her ears twitched at the sound of the whistle, a familiar rhythm that tugged at long-forgotten memories. She rose to her feet, her powerful frame alert. Her cubs followed her lead, instinctively sensing their mother's unease. Raya moved swiftly but cautiously, leading her cubs away from the direction of the whistle. She knew this sound, but it also meant danger. Her survival instincts, honed by years in the wild, guided her movements as she navigated the dense underbrush. Back in the tree, Lila's arm began to ache from holding her position, but she refused to relent. Suddenly, the poacher's radio crackled to life. A voice on the other end barked out orders, instructing them to relocate further upriver to avoid detection by approaching wildlife rangers. "They're onto us," one poacher growled, kicking the bait trap in frustration. "Let's move." Lila held her breath as the men packed up their equipment and retreated. She waited until their voices faded into the distance before climbing down from the tree. Her legs felt shaky, but relief coursed through her as she realized her plan had worked. Lila retraced her steps, careful to avoid making noise. When she reached the spot where Raya and her cubs had been resting, her heart swelled with relief. The tiger and her young ones were gone, their trail leading deeper into the jungle. They were safe, for now. Returning to the camp, Lila found Mateo and Dr. Anderson anxiously awaiting her. "What were you thinking?" Mateo demanded, his voice filled with a mix of anger and worry. "You could have been caught, or worse." "I couldn't just do nothing," Lila replied, her tone firm. The poachers were setting traps. Raya and her cubs were in danger. Dr. Anderson placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder, his expression softening. She took a calculated risk, and it paid off. "But Lila, you need to understand how dangerous this was, for you and for Raya. If those men had caught you, it could have escalated into something far worse." Lila nodded, her defiance giving way to exhaustion. "I know. But I couldn't live with myself if something happened to Raya because I was too afraid to act." The next day, the team received confirmation that the local authorities had intercepted the poachers and confiscated their equipment. It was a small victory, but Lila knew the battle wasn't over. Poachers were relentless, and the jungle was vast. Determined to stay one step ahead, Lila proposed a new plan. "We need to do more than monitor and report," she said during a team meeting. "We need to create a safe haven for Raya and her cubs, a territory that's too risky for poachers to approach." Mateo raised an eyebrow. "And how do you propose we do that?" "By using their own fears against them," Lila replied. "We can set up decoy traps with hidden cameras to capture their movements. If they think this area is under constant surveillance, they'll be less likely to return." Dr. Anderson nodded thoughtfully. "It's a bold idea, but it might just work. We'll need to coordinate with local rangers and use drones to expand our coverage." The team set to work, their efforts driven by a shared sense of purpose. They placed decoy traps throughout Raya's territory, each one rigged with motion-activated cameras and transmitters. They also set up hidden speakers that could emit sounds of human activity, creating the illusion of a heavily monitored area. As the days passed, the jungle seemed to settle back into its natural rhythm. Raya and her cubs continued to thrive, their movements captured on the team's cameras. Lila watched the footage with a mixture of pride and longing. She marveled at how much Raya had grown, not just in size but in confidence. The once captive tiger was now a queen of the jungle, guiding her cubs with grace and strength. But Lila's relief was tempered by the knowledge that poachers wouldn't give up so easily. Every time she saw a new set of tracks near the river, her heart skipped a beat. The fight to protect Raya and her family was far from over. One evening, As the team reviewed their latest footage, they captured a remarkable moment. Raya stood at the edge of the river, her cubs playfully splashing in the shallow water. The camera caught her lifting her head, her piercing gaze directed straight at the lens. "She knows we're watching," Lila said softly, a smile tugging at her lips. Mateo chuckled. "And she doesn't seem to mind. She trusts you, Lila." Dr. Anderson nodded. "That trust is rare and powerful. It's a reminder of what we're fighting for." The bond between Lila and Raya, forged in the innocence of childhood and tempered by the challenges of the wild, had become a symbol of hope. It was a testament to the enduring connection between humans and nature, a connection worth every risk and sacrifice. As the weeks passed, Raya and her cubs adapted seamlessly to their protected territory. The camera footage captured tender moments, the cubs playfully wrestling, Raya grooming them with maternal affection, and the family napping under the shade of the towering trees. Each clip brought immense satisfaction to the team, but for Lila, it was deeply personal, a window into the life of the tiger she had raised. One day, while reviewing the footage, Lila noticed something unusual. Raya was limping. The once graceful tiger moved with an awkward gait, and her left paw barely touched the ground. Concern etched across her face. Lila immediately alerted Dr. Anderson and Mateo. "We need to check on her," Lila insisted. "If she's injured, it could affect her ability to hunt and care for her cubs." Mateo frowned. "Lila, you know the risks of approaching her. She's wild now. We can't just walk up to her and examine her paw." Dr. Anderson, ever the voice of reason, weighed in. "We'll use the tranquilizer gun if necessary, but only as a last resort. Let's approach carefully and assess the situation first." The team set out at dawn, armed with their equipment and guided by the GPS tracker that Lila had placed on Raya during their initial reunion. The journey was arduous, with dense vegetation and uneven terrain testing their endurance. Despite the challenges, Lila's resolve remained unshaken. Raya needed her, and she wasn't going to let her down. As they neared Raya's location, they slowed their pace, moving silently to avoid startling the tiger. Lila spotted her first, resting near a fallen log with her cubs. The limp was evident as Raya shifted her position, wincing slightly. Lila whispered, "She's hurt, but she's not incapacitated. Let's observe her for a while before deciding what to do." Dr. Anderson nodded, setting up a tranquilizer gun just in case. Mateo kept his eyes on the surrounding area, ensuring the team's safety. Hours passed, and the team observed Raya from a distance. The cubs, unaware of their mother's discomfort, frolicked nearby. Raya watched them with a weary but protective gaze, her strength undiminished despite her injury. Lila's heart ached as she whispered, "She's doing her best, but she's in pain. We can't leave her like this." Dr. Anderson adjusted his binoculars. "It looks like she might have stepped on something sharp. If we can get closer, we might be able to help without using the tranquilizer." Mateo shook his head. "And what if she attacks? We're still talking about a fully grown tiger." Lila's determination hardened. "She won't. She knows me." Mateo opened his mouth to argue but stopped when he saw the conviction in Lila's eyes. Reluctantly, he nodded. "Just be careful." Lila approached Raya slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. She kept her hands visible and her movements deliberate, speaking softly to reassure the tiger. "Hey, girl. It's me. I am here to help." Raya's ears perked up, and her golden eyes fixed on Lila. For a moment, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. The tiger's cubs scampered behind her, sensing the tension but trusting their mother's judgment. When Lila was within a few feet, she knelt down and extended her hand, palm up. Raya sniffed the air, her gaze unwavering. Slowly, she shifted her weight, allowing Lila to see her injured paw. Lila exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Good girl," she murmured. "Let's take a look." Using a small flashlight, Lila examined the paw. A jagged thorn was lodged deep in the pad, surrounded by swelling. "It's a thorn," she called back to the team. I can remove it, but she might react. Dr. Anderson held up the tranquilizer gun, ready to act if needed. Mateo tightened his grip on his radio. Just be quick. Lila retrieved a pair of tweezers from her kit and moved closer. Raya watched her intently, her muscles taut but not hostile. It's okay, Lila soothed. I am almost done. With practiced precision, Lila grasped the thorn and pulled it out in one swift motion. Raya flinched but didn't move. Blood oozed from the wound, but it was minimal. Lila quickly cleaned the area with antiseptic and applied a soothing salve. There, she said softly, packing up her tools. All done. Raya lowered her paw to the ground, testing it cautiously. She looked at Lila, then nudged her shoulder with her massive head, a gesture of gratitude that left Lila teary-eyed. Back at the camp, the team reviewed the day's events. Mateo, still shaken, admitted, I didn't think Shed let you get that close. It's like she remembered everything. Dr. Anderson smiled. The bond between them is extraordinary. It's rare to see this level of trust in a wild animal. Lila nodded, her thoughts far away. It's more than trust. It's love. Raya knows ID never hurt her. The next morning, the team checked the camera footage and saw Raya moving more freely, her limp almost gone. The sight filled Lila with pride and relief. She had done what she set out to do, help her tiger without compromising her wild spirit. But as the team celebrated, a new challenge loomed on the horizon. Reports of increased poacher activity in the neighboring region sent a ripple of unease through the camp. Raya's safety, it seemed, would always be under threat. The camp was abuzz with tension following the news of increased poacher activity. The sanctuary, a haven for endangered animals, had always been vigilant, but the threat now felt closer than ever. Lila sat in the monitoring station, reviewing the latest reports. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she stared at the glowing screen displaying movement patterns of animals within the sanctuary. Mateo entered, his face grim. The reports are confirmed. A neighboring reserve found traps near their boundaries. They think the poachers are targeting larger animals, big cats included. Lila clenched her fists. Raya and her cubs are out there. If they're spotted. Dr. Anderson interrupted, his calm demeanor masking the gravity of the situation. Well, double the patrols and reinforce the perimeter. But Lila, we need to consider the possibility that they'll breach the sanctuary. Lila shook her head. No. I won't let that happen. The team sprang into action, coordinating with local authorities and setting up additional surveillance points around the sanctuary's borders. Cameras were adjusted to cover blind spots, and volunteers joined the patrols, armed with radios and emergency kits. Meanwhile, Lila's thoughts were consumed by Raya. The tiger and her cubs were deep within the sanctuary, far from the main access points, but that didn't ease her worry. Poachers were resourceful, and their greed often outweighed their fear of getting caught. As night fell, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Lila sat in the observation tower, a pair of binoculars clutched in her hands. Mateo joined her, carrying a thermos of coffee. You should get some rest, he said, placing the thermos beside her. Lila shook her head. I can't. If anything happens to Raya. Mateo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're doing everything we can. And Ray is smart. She'll sense danger before it gets too close. Hours passed, and the jungle was eerily quiet. Lila's heart raced at every rustle of leaves and crack of twigs. Then, just past midnight, a faint alarm buzzed on her console. Her eyes snapped to the screen, where one of the perimeter cameras showed movement, a shadowy figure darting through the trees. Mateo! Lila hissed, her voice sharp. There's someone near the north boundary. Mateo grabbed his radio, calling the patrol team. We've got movement at Sector 3. Be on alert. The patrol team, armed with flashlights and non-lethal deterrents, moved swiftly toward the location. Lila and Mateo watched anxiously as the live feed showed the team closing in on the intruder. Suddenly, a loud noise erupted, a gunshot. Lila's breath caught in her throat. No. The patrol team found the source of the noise, a snare trap rigged with a crude alarm system. It wasn't a direct threat yet, but it was a clear sign that poachers had entered the sanctuary. The trap was dismantled, and the team expanded their search radius, wary of further dangers. Back at the camp, Lila paced the floor, her mind racing. We need to find Raya before they do. If they've set traps, her cubs could wander into one. Dr. Anderson nodded. We'll track her GPS signal at first light. Moving at night is too risky. But what if? Lila began, her voice trembling. Mateo interrupted gently. She's a fighter, Lila. And she has you looking out for her. At dawn, the team set out, guided by Raya's tracker. The dense jungle was alive with the sounds of awakening wildlife, but Lila's focus was solely on the blinking dot on her handheld GPS device. As they ventured deeper into the sanctuary, the terrain became more challenging: muddy trails, thick underbrush, and treacherous slopes. After hours of trekking, they reached the area where Raya's signal was strongest. The team paused, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the tiger and her cubs. Lila's heart pounded as she spotted fresh paw prints in the soft earth. She's close, she whispered. The sound of rustling leaves drew their attention. Lila turned to see Raya emerging from the underbrush, her massive frame a striking contrast against the greenery. The tiger's amber eyes locked onto Lila's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. But the relief was short-lived. Behind Raya, two of her cubs appeared, their playful demeanor interrupted by a low growl from their mother. Lila followed Raya's gaze and froze. A group of armed men was approaching from the east, their movements stealthy but unmistakable. Poachers. Dr. Anderson whispered urgently, we need to retreat and call for backup. We can't confront them directly. But Lila's instincts screamed otherwise. If they left, Raya and her cubs would be defenseless. She tightened her grip on the tranquilizer gun slung over her shoulder. I am not leaving her. Mateo stepped forward, his voice firm. Lila, we can't risk our lives. We'll protect them, but we need to be smart about this. As the poachers moved closer, the team split up to create a diversion. Mateo and Dr. Anderson circled around to draw the men's attention, while Lila stayed with Raya, keeping her tranquilizer gun ready. Raya, as if sensing the danger, positioned herself between her cubs and the intruders. Her growl grew louder, a fierce warning that echoed through the jungle. The poachers hesitated, their confidence faltering at the sight of the formidable tiger. Lila took advantage of their hesitation, firing a warning shot from her tranquilizer gun. The dart embedded itself in a tree trunk near the men, sending them scrambling. The combined efforts of the team and Raya's intimidating presence forced the poachers to retreat, leaving behind their traps and weapons. Back at the camp, the team reported the incident to the authorities, ensuring the sanctuary's security would be reinforced. Lila sat beside Raya and her cubs, overwhelmed with relief. You're safe now, she murmured, stroking Raya's fur. And I'll make sure it stays that way. The bond between Lila and Raya had once again proven unbreakable, but the fight to protect the sanctuary and its beloved residents was far from over. The poachers' retreat was a temporary victory, but Lila and the team knew the sanctuary's safety was precarious. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the camp was a mix of urgency and determination. Meetings were held daily, strategies were drawn on whiteboards, and plans to fortify the sanctuary were put into motion. Every entrance, every weak spot, we need it all covered, Dr. Anderson declared, pointing at the map of the sanctuary pinned to the wall. No more close calls. Lila, though exhausted, was relentless. And we need patrols to cover a wider radius. If they try again, we'll be ready. Mateo chimed in. We'll also need community support. If we can get locals to report suspicious activity, it'll double our eyes and ears. The team worked tirelessly, sending out flyers, hosting meetings in nearby villages, and educating the community about the importance of protecting wildlife. Lila personally spoke to local leaders, emphasizing how the sanctuary's success was intertwined with their livelihoods and environment. Meanwhile, Raya and her cubs stayed close to the sanctuary's core, where security was tightest. Lila spent hours observing them, documenting their behavior. Raya seemed aware of the heightened activity, her demeanor more vigilant than usual. Her cubs, however, remained blissfully unaware, chasing each other around and pouncing on leaves. Watching them, Lila felt a pang of guilt. She should have to live like this, she confided to Mateo one evening. Always looking over her shoulder. Mateo nodded. But thanks to you, she's alive. And so are her cubs. That's what matters. The tranquility didn't last. One evening, as the team prepared for their nightly patrols, a loud explosion shattered the calm. Lila and Mateo bolted out of the monitoring station, their hearts racing. "It's the northern perimeter," shouted one of the guards, pointing toward the dense jungle. The team grabbed their equipment and rushed to the scene. When they arrived, they found a section of the sanctuary's fence blown apart. Nearby, 2 guards were injured but conscious, their faces pale with shock. "They came out of nowhere," one guard stammered. "Set off the bomb and ran." Lila's blood boiled. This was no longer a matter of poaching, this was war. As the team secured the area and tended to the injured, Lila scanned the surroundings. Her heart sank when she noticed tracks leading deeper into the jungle. "They've gone after Raya," she whispered. Mateo overheard her and grabbed her arm. "Lila, we need to regroup. We can't charge in unprepared. She's out there, Mateo. With her cubs." Lila's voice cracked with emotion. "I won't let them take her." Dr. Anderson intervened, his voice firm. "Mateo's right. We need a plan. We'll track them, but we do this smart." Reluctantly, Lila nodded, her hands trembling. "Fine. But we don't waste a second." Using a combination of GPS tracking and footprints, the team followed the poacher's trail. The jungle was dark and ominous, the air thick with tension. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig sent shivers down their spines. After hours of tracking, they found signs of a camp, discarded wrappers, a smoldering fire, and, most chillingly, a crude cage large enough for a tiger. Lila's stomach churned at the thought of Raya and her cubs being trapped in such a horrid contraption. "They're close," Mateo whispered. "Stay sharp." The team pressed on, their senses heightened. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. Lila froze, her eyes scanning the shadows. Ahead, she saw a glint of amber eyes, Raya's. The tiger stood protectively in front of her cubs, her body tense and ready to strike. Behind her, the poachers emerged, armed and determined. One of them raised a tranquilizer gun, aiming at Raya. "No!" Lila screamed, stepping into view. The poachers turned, startled by her sudden appearance. Mateo and the rest of the team followed, their weapons drawn. A standoff ensued, the jungle silent except for the tense breathing of humans and animals alike. "Leave now," Lila commanded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're trespassing on protected land." The lead poacher sneered. "You think a couple of rangers are going to stop us? There's money on that tiger." Mateo stepped forward, his gaze icy. "And there's a prison cell with your name on it. Walk away, or we'll make sure you never leave this jungle." The poachers hesitated, their bravado faltering. Suddenly, Raya let out a deafening roar, her powerful presence making it clear she wouldn't back down. The cubs huddled behind her, their tiny growls mimicking their mother's defiance. The roar was the tipping point. The poachers, outnumbered and intimidated, began to retreat. One of them muttered, "Not worth it," before disappearing into the darkness. As the team secured the area, Lila approached Raya cautiously. The tiger's eyes softened as she recognized her old friend. Lila knelt, her voice trembling with relief. "You're safe now." Raya nudged Lila's hand with her massive head, a gesture of gratitude and trust. The cubs peeked out from behind their mother, their curiosity overcoming their fear. Lila couldn't help but smile, tears streaming down her face. Back at the sanctuary, the team debriefed and celebrated their victory. The authorities were notified, and a full investigation into the poachers was launched. Security measures were doubled, ensuring the sanctuary would remain a safe haven. Lila sat by Raya's enclosure, watching the tiger and her cubs sleep peacefully. "We did it," she whispered. "You're safe." But in her heart, Lila knew the fight wasn't over. The sanctuary had won this battle, but the war to protect wildlife continued. And she was ready for whatever came next. The sanctuary was quiet again, its shadows whispering tales of survival and courage. But the atmosphere was far from relaxed. The recent attack had left everyone on edge, and Lila couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Late one evening, as she reviewed surveillance footage, the radio crackled. "Lila, you need to see this," Mateo's voice came through, laced with urgency. She grabbed her flashlight and rushed to the observation deck, where Mateo and Dr. Anderson stood, their faces pale. On the screen, a group of heavily armed poachers was visible, moving silently through the jungle. "They're back," Mateo said grimly. "And this time, they've brought reinforcements." Lila's heart pounded. "We need to act now." The team quickly mobilized, alerting the authorities and coordinating with local law enforcement. But they knew help might not arrive in time. This was their fight. "We hold them off," Lila declared. "Raya and her cubs are counting on us." The sanctuary's guards took their positions, night vision goggles scanning the dense jungle. Tranquilizer guns and noise deterrents were distributed. Lila led a small group to Raya's enclosure, determined to protect the tigers at all costs. As the poachers drew closer, the air grew tense. The jungle was alive with sounds: the hum of insects, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of nocturnal animals, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of danger. Then, it began. A flash of movement. The first poacher appeared, his silhouette stark against the moonlit trees. He raised his weapon, but before he could fire, a blaring alarm pierced the night. The sanctuary's security system activated, bathing the area in harsh floodlights. "Hold your positions," Lila shouted. The poachers scattered, their cover blown. Some fired blindly into the air, trying to silence the alarms, while others pressed forward, undeterred. It was chaos. At Raya's enclosure, the tigress paced anxiously. The commotion had woken her cubs, who whimpered softly. Lila crouched by the fence, her voice soothing. "It's okay, girl. We've got this." Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows, a poacher who had bypassed the main defenses. He aimed his tranquilizer gun at Raya, his intent clear. "Stop!" Lila screamed, stepping into his line of sight. The poacher hesitated, surprised by her boldness. But before he could react, a low growl rumbled behind him. He turned, his eyes widening in terror. Raya had broken through the secondary barrier. The tigress stood tall and defiant, her golden eyes blazing with fury. With a deafening roar, she charged. The poacher dropped his weapon and fled, disappearing into the jungle. Raya didn't give chase. Instead, she returned to her cubs, nuzzling them reassuringly. Lila watched in awe, her heart swelling with pride. The tigress wasn't just fighting for survival, she was fighting for her family. Meanwhile, the sanctuary's defenses held strong. The poachers, overwhelmed by the alarms, lights, and coordinated resistance, began retreating. But Lila knew they couldn't let them escape unchallenged. "Follow me," she called, leading a small group into the jungle. The pursuit was intense. The poachers, desperate to evade capture, left a trail of destruction in their wake: trampled plants, discarded equipment, and hastily abandoned weapons. But Lila and her team were relentless. Finally, they cornered the group near the sanctuary's northern boundary. The poachers, realizing they were outmatched, raised their hands in surrender. The authorities arrived moments later, taking the culprits into custody. Exhausted but victorious, Lila returned to the sanctuary. The team cheered as she entered, their relief palpable. You did it, Mateo said, his voice filled with admiration. No, Lila replied, glancing at Raya. We did it. As dawn broke, the sanctuary was bathed in golden light. The tigers, safe and sound, basked in the warmth, their ordeal behind them. Lila stood by the enclosure, her hand pressed against the glass. You're incredible, she whispered. Never let anyone take your freedom away. Raya met her gaze, her eyes filled with a calm strength. It was a moment of understanding, a bond that transcended species. The sanctuary became a beacon of hope and resilience. News of the poachers' capture spread, drawing attention to the plight of endangered wildlife. Donations poured in, and the sanctuary expanded its reach, helping more animals find safety. For Lila, the fight was far from over. But as she watched Raya and her cubs thrive, she knew it was all worth it. The tigress had taught her a powerful lesson. No matter the odds, you must always protect what you love. The sanctuary had weathered its greatest storm, emerging stronger and more united than ever. The poachers were now behind bars, their illegal network exposed and dismantled thanks to the evidence gathered during the raid. It was a victory not just for the sanctuary, but for the countless animals whose lives would be saved by this action. As Lila walked through the sanctuary grounds, the sun rising above the treetops, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fight had been hard, but it had brought out the best in everyone, humans and animals alike. Raya and her cubs thrived in the days that followed. The cubs grew more adventurous, their playful antics bringing joy to everyone who watched them. Raya remained ever vigilant, her strength and grace inspiring awe in all who saw her. The sanctuary became a symbol of resilience, attracting visitors, volunteers, and supporters from around the world. Schools organized field trips, giving children a chance to see the majestic animals up close and learn about the importance of conservation. Lila took on a new role as an educator, sharing the sanctuary's story and Raya's incredible journey. She's more than a survivor, Lila would say during her talks. She's a reminder that we're all connected and that every life matters. One evening, as the sanctuary staff gathered for a celebration, Mateo raised a toast. To Lila, who never gave up. And to Raya, who showed us the true meaning of courage. Lila smiled, her cheeks flushing. This was a team effort, she said. And Raya deserves most of the credit. She reminded us why we do what we do. The group clinked their glasses, their laughter echoing through the night. It was a moment of unity, a testament to the power of collective action. The sanctuary's success also led to larger changes. Governments in the region strengthened their anti-poaching laws, and conservation organizations collaborated to create safer environments for endangered species. Raya's story became a rallying cry for wildlife protection, inspiring people across the globe to take action. For Lila, life at the sanctuary became her greatest joy. Every day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to make a difference. She often visited Raya's enclosure, sitting quietly as the tigress watched over her cubs. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forged through shared struggle and triumph. One day, as Lila sat by the enclosure, she noticed Raya standing at the edge, her golden eyes fixed on her. The tigress walked closer, her movements slow and deliberate. She paused, her massive frame just a few feet away, and lowered her head. Lila held her breath, her heart swelling with emotion. It was as if Raya was saying thank you. Tears filled Lila's eyes as she whispered, "You're welcome, girl. You're welcome." The sanctuary continued to grow, becoming a sanctuary not just for animals, but for hope. Raya's cubs eventually matured and were prepared for release into the wild, where they would carry their mother's legacy forward. On the day of their release, Lila stood at the edge of the forest, watching as the young tigers disappeared into the trees. Raya stayed behind, her choice to remain a testament to the bond she had with the sanctuary and with Lila. Years later, as Lila reflected on her journey, she realized how much she had learned from Raya. The tigress had taught her about resilience, love, and the importance of fighting for what you believe in. Raya's roar echoed in her heart, a reminder that every effort, no matter how small, could make a difference. And so, the sanctuary's story continued, a testament to the power of courage and compassion. Raya's legacy lived on in the lives she touched, both human and animal. Would you ever fight to protect something you love, no matter the odds? Let us know in the comments below. And if Raya's story inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Together, we can make a difference.